The sun hung low over the small town of Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. Mary Thompson stood outside her modest farmhouse, wiping her hands on a worn apron. Her calloused fingers bore the marks of years spent tending to crops and caring for her family. She was a simple woman, unassuming in every way, but today she carried an air of determination that even her husband, John, couldn't ignore. "Mary, where are you going?" John called from the porch, his voice tinged with curiosity. He leaned against the railing, watching as Mary adjusted her wide-brimmed hat. "To the dealership," she replied firmly, climbing into their old pickup truck. "I'm tired of waiting for someone else to fix our problems. If we're ever going to get ahead, we need a new tractor." John frowned but didn't argue. He knew better than to stand in Mary's way when she set her mind to something. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this trip would end badly. After all, they weren't exactly rolling in money, not like some of the folks in town who drove flashy cars and lived in sprawling estates. At the dealership, Mary stepped out of the truck, straightening her shoulders as she approached the glass doors. Inside, the showroom gleamed with polished vehicles, from sleek sedans to powerful tractors. A young salesman named Greg greeted her with a practiced smile, his eyes flickering over her plain clothes before dismissing her importance. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" he asked, his tone polite but patronizing. "I'm here to look at tractors," Mary said, ignoring his condescension. "Something reliable but not too expensive." Greg nodded, though his expression suggested he already doubted her ability to make a purchase. "Right this way," he said, leading her toward a row of machines. As he rattled off specifications, Mary listened intently, asking pointed questions about fuel efficiency and maintenance costs. But no matter how knowledgeable she proved herself to be, Greg's attitude remained unchanged. After nearly an hour of discussion, Mary finally settled on a model she liked. She pulled out her checkbook, ready to put down a deposit, when Greg hesitated. "I'll need to run this by my manager," he said, taking the check reluctantly. He disappeared into the back office, leaving Mary standing alone among the gleaming machinery. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. When Greg returned, his demeanor had shifted entirely. Gone was the forced politeness. Instead, he wore a smug grin. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson," he said, handing back her check. "We've decided not to move forward with your application. Your credit score, well, let's just say it's not up to our standards." Mary's heart sank, but she refused to let him see her disappointment. "That's fine," she said coolly, turning on her heel. "I'll take my business elsewhere." As she walked out of the dealership, the weight of rejection pressed heavily on her chest. She climbed back into the truck, gripping the steering wheel tightly. For years, she and John had worked tirelessly, scraping together enough to keep their farm afloat. And yet, moments like this reminded her just how far they still had to go. Back at home, Mary found John sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a stack of bills. His brow furrowed as he added numbers in his head, his frustration palpable. "How did it go?" he asked without looking up. "They wouldn't sell to me," Mary admitted, sinking into the chair across from him. "Said my credit wasn't good enough." John sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I told you it was a waste of time. We don't have the kind of money those people respect." But we deserve better," Mary snapped, her voice rising. "All we do is work day in and day out. Why does it feel like we're always getting pushed around?" John met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and resignation. "Because that's how it's always been for people like us. The system isn't built for farmers anymore." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, laden with unspoken frustrations and shared failures. Finally, Mary broke it. "There has to be another way," she said softly. "We can't keep living like this." John nodded, though he seemed uncertain. "What do you suggest?" Mary hesitated, then stood abruptly. "Let me handle things for a while. Trust me, okay?" The next morning, Mary woke before dawn, her mind racing with possibilities. She brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, sketching out a plan on a notepad. John stumbled in moments later, bleary-eyed but curious. "What are you working on?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "I'm going to talk to Mr. Harlan," Mary replied without looking up. "He owes us money for last season's harvest, and it's time he paid up." John nearly choked on his coffee. "You can't just march into Harlan's office and demand payment. He's one of the richest men in town. He'll laugh you out of the building." Mary set down her pen and fixed him with a steely gaze. "Then I'll make sure he doesn't laugh." Mr. Harlan's office was located in the heart of Willow Creek, atop a gleaming glass building that towered over the surrounding structures. Mary arrived dressed in her Sunday best, a modest navy blue dress paired with sensible shoes, and marched straight to the reception desk. "I need to speak with Mr. Harlan," she declared firmly. The receptionist glanced up, clearly unimpressed. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I think he'll want to see me," Mary said, leaning slightly forward. "Tell him it's about the Thompson farm." After a brief hesitation, the receptionist buzzed Harlan's secretary, who eventually ushered Mary into the executive's lavish office. Mr. Harlan sat behind a mahogany desk, his sharp suit and cold demeanor making him seem even more imposing. "Mrs. Thompson," he greeted her coolly. "What brings you here?" "You owe us $10,000 for last year's crop," Mary began without preamble. "We've been patient, but we need that money now." Harlan leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Ah, yes, the Thompsons. You're right, I do owe you. But business is slow these days. Perhaps we could renegotiate terms." "No renegotiation," Mary shot back. "You agreed to pay us, and we upheld our end of the deal. Now it's your turn." Harlan studied her for a long moment, then chuckled. "You're quite persistent, aren't you? Fine, I'll write you a check, but only because I admire your tenacity." As promised, Harlan handed over a check for the full amount. Mary thanked him curtly and left the office, clutching the envelope tightly. By the time she returned home, John was pacing anxiously in the driveway. "Well?" he demanded as she stepped out of the truck. "We got the money," Mary announced triumphantly, waving the check. "Now we can finally get that tractor." But Mary's victory was short-lived. Later that evening, as they celebrated with a simple dinner, there was a knock at the door. John answered it to find two men in suits standing on their porch. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," one of them asked. "We're from the bank. We've received notice that your mortgage is overdue. If you don't settle the balance within 48 hours, we'll be forced to foreclose." Mary felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible. We've been making payments every month." The banker shook his head sympathetically. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but according to our records, several payments were missed. Unless you can provide proof otherwise, the property will go into default." After the men left, Mary sank onto the couch, gripping the check from Harlan. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "How could this happen?" John knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Maybe we should use the money to pay off the mortgage instead of buying the tractor." "No," Mary said firmly. "We worked too hard for this. There has to be another solution." The following day, Mary found herself sitting across from Mrs. Peterson, the town's only lawyer. The elderly woman adjusted her glasses as she reviewed the documents Mary had brought with her. "This is troubling," Mrs. Peterson said finally, tapping a finger against the paper. "It appears someone tampered with your mortgage records. Several payments marked as received were later altered to show they were missed." Mary's heart raced. Who would do something like this? Mrs. Peterson hesitated before answering. "There's no proof yet, but these kinds of manipulations often involve people in positions of power, bank executives, real estate moguls, someone who stands to gain if you lose your farm." "Harlan," Mary muttered under her breath. She clenched her fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "He must have orchestrated this after I confronted him." Mrs. Peterson nodded gravely. "It's possible, but proving it won't be easy. You'll need evidence and allies." Determined to fight back, Mary left the lawyer's office and headed straight for the local diner, where she knew she could find some of the townsfolk sympathetic to her plight. Among them was Sarah, a close friend whose family also owned a struggling farm. "Mary, what's wrong?" Sarah asked, noticing the worry lines etched into her face. Mary explained everything: the missing payments, Harlan's suspicious behavior, and the looming foreclosure. By the time she finished, Sarah was shaking her head in disbelief. "That snake!" Sarah exclaimed. "You can't let him get away with this. We'll help however we can." Word spread quickly through the small community, and by evening, a group of farmers had gathered at the Thompsons' house. They brainstormed strategies, pooling resources and ideas to uncover the truth about the altered records. One of them suggested contacting an investigative journalist from the city who specialized in exposing corruption. Meanwhile, John grew increasingly uneasy. He pulled Mary aside as the meeting dispersed. "Are you sure about this? Taking on Harlan is dangerous. What if he retaliates?" "He already has," Mary shot back. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone he's exploited. If we don't stand up now, who will?" John sighed, but nodded reluctantly. "All right, but promise me you'll be careful." As the days passed, Mary worked tirelessly alongside her newfound allies. They uncovered emails between Harlan and a bank executive discussing ways to pressure farmers into selling their land cheaply. Armed with this evidence, Mary arranged a meeting with the town council, determined to expose Harlan's scheme. On the morning of the meeting, Mary dressed carefully, choosing a crisp blouse and tailored slacks that made her feel confident. As she and John drove to the courthouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching them. Inside the packed room, Mary presented her case, laying out the documents and testimonies they had gathered. The council members listened intently, their expressions growing graver with each revelation. Just as Mary thought they might finally have justice, the doors burst open and Harlan strode in, flanked by two burly men. "You think you're clever, don't you, Mrs. Thompson?" Harlan sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "But you've underestimated me." Before Mary could respond, one of Harlan's men handed over a folder to the council. Inside were forged documents alleging that Mary had bribed witnesses and fabricated evidence. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Harlan smirked triumphantly. Mary's stomach churned, but she refused to back down. "These are lies," she said firmly, addressing the council. "Everything we've shown you is true. Don't let him intimidate you." The tension in the room was palpable as the council deliberated. For a moment it seemed like all hope was lost. The council's deliberation stretched on for what felt like hours. Mary stood at the center of the room, her hands trembling slightly, but her resolve unwavering. John stood beside her, his presence a quiet source of strength. Around them, the townsfolk who had rallied to support Mary exchanged anxious glances, their earlier confidence wavering under Harlan's calculated attack. Finally, one of the council members, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Caldwell, cleared her throat. "We've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties," she began, her voice steady and authoritative. "While Mr. Harlan's documents raise serious questions, we cannot ignore the inconsistencies in his own testimony. Therefore, we will grant Mrs. Thompson's 72 hours to provide additional proof of her claims." Harlan's smug expression faltered. He opened his mouth to protest, but Mrs. Caldwell raised a hand to silence him. "This decision is final." As the meeting adjourned, Mary felt a flicker of hope reignite within her. She turned to Sarah and the others, her voice filled with determination. "We need to dig deeper. There has to be something we missed." That night, Mary and John sat at the kitchen table, poring over every document they had collected. The clock ticked past midnight as exhaustion weighed heavily on them. Just as Mary was about to call it quits, John noticed something peculiar in one of the emails between Harlan and the bank executive. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a line buried deep in the text. It referenced a private account linked to Harlan's offshore holdings, a potential smoking gun. Mary's eyes widened. "If we can trace that account, we'll have all the proof we need." Early the next morning, Mary drove into the city to meet with the investigative journalist Sarah had recommended. After explaining the situation, the journalist agreed to help, promising to expedite the investigation. By late afternoon, they had uncovered a trail of financial transactions that directly implicated Harlan in fraudulent activities. Armed with this new evidence, Mary returned to the courthouse just before the deadline. As she presented the findings to the council, Harlan's face turned pale. His attempts to discredit the information fell flat, and the council unanimously ruled in Mary's favor, ordering Harlan to pay restitution to affected farmers and face criminal charges. The victory was bittersweet. While justice had been served, the ordeal had taken its toll on Mary and her community. Still, there was a sense of triumph in knowing they had stood together against overwhelming odds. The following day, as Mary walked outside to check on the fields, she heard the unmistakable purr of an engine approaching. Turning, she saw a sleek Rolls-Royce pull up in front of their farmhouse. Her heart skipped a beat as John stepped out of the car, grinning sheepishly. "I figured it was time I surprised you," he said, holding out a set of keys. "After everything you've done, I wanted to give you something special." Mary stared at him, tears welling up in her eyes. "John, how did you afford this?" He shrugged. "Let's just say I made some wise investments while you were busy saving the farm." For a moment, they simply stood there laughing and crying in equal measure. The Rolls-Royce gleamed in the sunlight, a symbol not just of luxury, but of resilience and love. Call to action. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Stories like these remind us of the power of determination and community. What would you have done if you were in Mary's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.